And of course, things could go wrong again. Here we go. Wonderful. Well, let's switch here. And hello and welcome back to Kaos Historical Media, and presenting you with a wonderful green screen. Here we go. This is my name, Ben van Koert, Kaos Historical Media, and today we're going to talk about medieval saddles. Why all these problems every time? I tried a new setup, but I had to switch it at the very last second to make the very best for you guys, and still I managed to F it up. But no worries, because we're here now, we're live, and I've got Ed live on Skype right next to me for the Q&A at the end of this. But before we do that, I want to present you Ed's wonderful tour in New Zealand, along with all his saddles. Not much for me to say right now, so let's sit back and enjoy. One thing I'd like to add is why start this tour with saddles? Because getting way ahead of myself. Saddles, medieval saddles, they're a bit different than the modern dressage saddles, and of course, they all have their separate function: riding saddles, war saddles, jousting saddles in some cases even. And I'd like to start with the saddle as a part of a series about the anatomy of a joust, or anatomy of a lance, if you will. Because when you consider the weapons platform that is the medieval knight, most people think about the swords and the lances and, oh, maybe a shield and armor. But in every martial art, footwork is the most important thing you have. And when riding, the footwork translates back into the horse. Horses, they have their own characters, their own opinions, and you need to find a partnership to do this stuff together. And the only connection you have between your weapon and the ground is the horse. So you need a decent rider-horse interface. And of course you've got your legs, but the saddle also fulfills a very important function in that. So going from there, I'd like to switch to Ed's presentation, live from wonderful New Zealand. Here we go.
Hello everybody, and first thing I'd like to say is welcome to New Zealand, and secondly, thank you, Ben, for inviting me along today. So my name is Ed, and we're going to be talking about saddles today, medieval saddles, specifically joust saddles, but we're going to have a look at a few other styles as well. So the first thing I want to show you is this saddle. So this is a copy of a 13th century saddle based on a few different artworks. So if we just flip this up, what we'll see on the underside is you'll see two solid bars down here which sit on the horse's back, and these are joined at the front by what we call the pommel, and at the back by what's called the cantle. And then the seat of the saddle is made up of leather and wool felt and this canvas covering. And this saddle design is pretty universal, so different cultures all over the world and different time periods. Most saddles are built around the same principle of two bars running down the horse's back, joined at the front and the back by a pommel and a cantle. But what we see in the 15th century is we see saddle design take a bit of a change for a while. So this here is a saddle tree, and so this is the sort of thing you'd see in 15th century, specifically for jousting. And so what you'll see here is that the seat of the saddle is solid timber. So we don't just have those two bars down the side, the whole thing is built up and carved into one solid piece. So we'll see on the front of this one, this pommel plate. I've seen it referred to as by a couple of different names. I'll just call it a pommel plate for today. And you'll see we've got these bolts in it, which at the moment aren't holding anything, but these will be used to hold steel plates. So that's one thing that really sets this apart as a saddle for jousting or for war. If you need to plate your saddle in steel, that's a pretty good indication that you're expecting some sort of trouble. And around the back of the cantle, around the back of the saddle, the cantle, you'll see, now it's a little bit deceptive. Sometimes they look quite high, but this actually is not as high as my Western saddle, and it's pretty similar to dressage saddles that I have as well. So something about the shape of these saddles makes them look high in the back, but they're really not that high at all. But you'll notice that we've got these ears which wrap around kind of the lumbar region of the rider, and the pads on these will be a separate piece. So when this is finished, there'll be canvas pillows stuffed with wool felt, and that will lace onto here. And we've got these as slots for the stirrups there. So what we're going to do now, oh, and the other thing, I knew I was forgetting something, and you'll also notice that the bars of the saddle, we've got these extensions down the side here. So this gives quite a bit of stability to the saddle. So what we're going to do now is, if we pan over this way, we'll see we've got a herd of horses over here, and they've wandered away a little bit, all dressed up in different styles of medieval saddles. So we're going to wander over and have a look at those. So this is Stella, and she's wearing a saddle which I do. Most of my own personal riding actually is done in this saddle. So this one is based on some late 14th century artworks, and so my whole kit, my house jousting kit, is kind of similar time and geographical location to the rest of this saddle. She's got a matching breastplate and bridle to go with this saddle as well, so we can probably find some stills to insert into the video of that. And we've also got on this saddle some nice reproduction stirrups, which are dated from the early 15th century. And so we'll see with this one, this front pommel plate, how it's got quite a deep curve to it. And that's quite typical of the late 14th century Italian artworks. So just curving this away at the bottom, it gives a little bit more freedom of movement for the legs of the rider. And this is Connie. So this style of saddle with the that front pommel plate and the big wraparound ears at the back, we do see this in the civilian context as well. So this one I've done up in more of a nice sort of civilian saddle rather than a joust saddle. You could joust in this one. I have engineered it strong enough for that. It's got some steel reinforcing hidden in the cantle here. And one thing that we also often see when these saddles are used in a civilian context is just to add a bit of luxury and a bit of padding. It's something like this. So this is just a simple velvet blanket which we can throw over there. And if it's a cold day, or if you're spending a bit longer in the saddle, that's really quite soft and comfortable to ride in. And it also looks just a little bit posh, because when you're a nobleman in the Middle Ages riding around, you want to look a little bit posh in your saddle. So a lot of people might be watching and thinking, well, what place in the modern world does a medieval style saddle have? And Connie is a horse that these saddles are actually very well suited to. She's very short in the back, so we actually find have quite a bit of trouble finding modern saddles that will actually fit her, modern adult sized saddles to go on this horse. She's also, as you might tell, she's quite round, and she doesn't have too much of a wither on her, and so having the bars extend quite further down on the side helps give a lot of stability. So this is really one of the best saddles that we actually have for this horse, despite all of the modern ones that I've got in my tack shed. So Danny here is wearing something a little bit different than the other ones we've just talked about. So this saddle is based on a couple of early 15th century hunting manuscripts. A lot of people look at the jousting style saddles that we've just looked at and don't like the idea of being so trapped in the saddle. They'd rather have something with a bit more freedom of movement. And that's really why I made this one for myself. As you've seen, we've got a few big hills around here. And so I do find often when I'm doing steep hill work with my horses that the front, that front pommel plate stops me being able to adjust my body weight to help my horse, especially when we're doing steep descents. So often this sort of saddle with this big horn at the front, sometimes the back will be a little bit flatter, and quite often you see them in two lobes, like the top of a love heart, or maybe it's supposed to be two buttocks. I don't really know, but there are some very nice surviving examples of these covered with carved ivory panels. This one I've gone for a bit more of a hunting look. And the final saddle that we're going to look at today is this jousting or war saddle here. So this is based on some late 15th century German sources. So as you can see, we've got this steel plating on the front there, which really sets it aside as something for jousting or for war, something where you're expecting a bit of trouble. So just a quick note here, you'll see I've got a saddle blanket with this one. Saddle blankets don't seem to have been in that widespread of use in the Middle Ages based on the artworks that I look at and looking at these saddles. Personally, I do prefer to use one. A lot of that is hygiene. A lot of my saddles end up going off to other homes, and of course they don't want their saddle arriving covered in horsehair. And also modern biosecurity is something that I have to think about. I travel a lot between New Zealand and Australia. Both those countries have quite strict biosecurity protocols, and a saddle coming through customs with me at the airport covered in horsehair is quite likely to get confiscated and incinerated. So that's one of the reasons that I often use a saddle blanket. You'll see that there are no flaps on this one. I might add some later on, but a lot of modern day jousters do choose to leave the flaps off. So not having saddle flaps, it does give a much better level of connection with the horse. So for some people that's a deliberate decision to leave those flaps off. But before we talk about this one too much more, I'm going to go slip into some armour and grab a shield and get on Casper, and we can have a bit of a look at the whole system and how they all fit together. So by the magic of television, here I am on Casper wearing my leg harness. My leg harness and doublet don't match the date of the saddle, but we'll just ignore that for now. So like with any piece of sporting equipment, there's a lot of personal preference with these saddles. Some people like this to come in nice and close, right in close to their gut here. Some people prefer it to curve out a bit more to give them a bit more space here. This one is relatively short, but this is what we see in the late 15th century German artworks that this saddle is based on. This one is also a little bit more spacious in the seat length than I would normally use. My own jousting saddle that I normally ride in, it's about 32 centimetres from the cantle here in a straight line to the pommel there. This one's a little bit longer than that. And just do up that buckle there. And you'll see on the back here, how I mentioned before, this cantle isn't particularly high, so you can see here that it's sitting, I'll just move Casper there, just sitting quite low on my waist and wrapping around my buttocks there. And so this cantle isn't what stops me coming off the horse backwards. What stops me coming off backwards is this pommel plate on the front here. So to come off a horse backwards, the first thing that happens, easy boy, is the legs come up. But you can see on the saddle here, that motion is interrupted by this plate quite early on. I'm just going to move Casper here just because we've got the sun there, and I'm just trying to avoid shooting straight into the sun. Here we go, easy. And the cantle here, well, you see this quite close, low down around the buttocks there. So if you imagine that I'm receiving a blow from the front diagonal left, safe my lance from a jousting opponent. That force is going to come diagonally through this way, and so this here gives me a lot of that kind of diagonal lateral support to help keep me in the saddle. So what I'm going to do now is I will grab up my jousting shield and we'll have a look at how that interacts with the whole system. Right, so now I've got my jousting shield on. So this is a style and date of shield that does really match the saddle in terms of the late 15th century German theme. So what you can see now is I've got the camera pointing at me from the same angle that an opponent would be coming at me during a joust. So hopefully you can see there the level of protection that this shield gives. I've got my leg fairly well protected there, and then we've got this front pommel plate on the saddle, and then that gives way to the shield. Most of my hand I can hide behind the shield here, and covers me right up to my chin, so where I might have a great bassinet or something like that, giving a nice deflection surface away from my face. I won't talk too much about the shield. I understand that someone else is going to be talking about that a little bit separately, but hopefully this camera angle that you've got there from the diagonal left just shows how all these pieces fit together to give me a very high level of protection in a joust.
So thank you, Ed, for this really great video. You took the time of videoing all that, and I truly loved the backdrop and everything. New Zealand is really wonderful. Just hoping for all this COVID stuff to be gone rather quickly, so everyone can travel again to New Zealand and have great events again. But then again, where would that leave me streaming everything? Right next to me on another screen, I have Ed waiting for us to switch to him live. I haven't seen any questions pop on just yet. But as these things go, when you film stuff, there's always extra stuff you'd like to add. So without anything in the way, I'm gonna switch to Ed now. Here we go. Hi Ed, great to see you. No worries. I think it's really great. We can do this stuff just live on the internet, and you know, and have these conversations, and you know, just connect in some way. Now we can't do it in person. So after filming all that, I know it took you great effort, but I think it shows. Is there anything else you'd like to add or like to tell us about the process of doing it? Doing the filming, just
spend, you know, €10,000 or more on some armour and get a nice shield, and spend all my, you know, lots more money on a horse. I don't know what horses cost in Europe. I'm guessing a lot. And then I think a saddle is still kind of seems to be a bit of an afterthought. And so I think it's great that you're doing the saddle episode first.
yeah. Of course, I screwed up with the audio in the beginning just a bit. So to recap what you said, you know, you're really happy. You didn't have anything to add to the filming. It was your first time, but I thought what you did was very professional. Just the way you provided it. So I was very happy to cut it together. So happy with that. And you cut in at the bit that you thought that was great to start this series using the saddles. Um, well, of course, because like I said in the intro, any martial art needs footwork to be perfect before you can start using the weapons.
Yeah.
Um, I learned that the hard way when I started jousting, because I had quite a bit of sword experience in the past and fighting with pole axes, and in a way of maybe it was kind of a bet with Arne, where he said, "Well, why don't you do this then?" I said, "Well, how hard can it be?" I think I just need to start riding then. And I started getting on a horse, and it's like, well, I think I get this. But once you add all the extra layers and all the extra bits and all the extra, it starts it's a different beast, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think getting all these elements working together is tricky. So I think this could be a neat series actually. And I find building a saddle for jousting, of course, you've got not just the normal complexity of, well, you have to build the saddle to fit the horse. Of course, that's to start with. It's always the starting point. Every saddle I build is built around the horse, or measurements tracings from the horse if I don't have the horse handy. And then it has to fit the rider as well. So that's a normal part of building a saddle. But then, of course, you get the added complexities that the saddle has to work with the harness. And of course, there's different sorts of harnesses out there, and so that adds kind of another layer of complexity in getting a saddle to work as part of that system. Things like getting the tassets and the folds and the armour to sit right in the saddle.
Yeah, because of course many of the viewers might have experienced how difficult it can be to get properly fitted armor, but the complexity of adding another element, which is the saddle,
Yeah,
also can show you all kinds of difficulties with getting the armor right. Things
yeah,
you might not have considered before. The moment you get on a horse, you suddenly notice, oh, so this is why the greaves need to fit this closely. Otherwise, you don't have any, good feel, or pinching pinching leather just at the wrong spot, the sensitive bit and the inside of the leg,
yeah.
all these things. But once you get this combination, working, what's it? How can you describe riding in such a saddle?
So I've been now. It's probably about. I was trying to think before. It's either 4 or 5 years since I built my first medieval saddle, because here in New Zealand it was hard to source one. So it's about 4 or 5 years now that I've been building them myself, and riding in them. So almost all of my own riding is now done in these saddles. And so a couple of things I find is I find I can feel a lot more from my horse. I think a lot of modern saddles are made to fit a wide variety of people, to be comfortable for a wide variety of people, and to try and achieve that, you get a lot of padding on them. And I think that really muffles a lot of what is being transmitted from the horse, the movement of the horse, the footfalls of the horse through the saddle to you. So you detect a lot more of that. And I find my horses a lot more responsive in these saddles as well. A lot of that is probably due to the fact that these saddles are custom built for my shape and for my horses. But I think also the design of them themselves, for example, the extension of the bars at the back of the saddle where they come down now. I think when you move your hips and your body in the saddle, I think that helps kind of transmit some of that twisting of your body through the saddle and communicate to the horse that well, you want it to turn or bend in this way. So I find them great to ride in.
and also as well a few other people in Australia are riding in my horse in saddles that I've built as well now. I think people go on and use these saddles for so much more than just jousting. They use them, for a lot of training and riding and flat work, even outside of jousting.
Yeah, that's similar to my experience when I got the chance to ride in these saddles just a few times. It's almost, and that's how I experienced it at least. It's the same with armor, which is a bit more of my specialty than saddles. So that's why I keep referring to that. Also, maybe some of the viewers have a bit more of a reference point in that sense. When you have good fitted armor, the funny bit is that once it's well fitted to a person, it's easier for someone else to wear it as well, even if they have slightly different body type than ill-fitted armor, which is basically one size fits none. And do you think this translates to saddles also in a way? Of course, it's made to the horse, but once you start switching riders, is it still as effective, or?
Everyone has their own. I think everyone has their own preferences. I think I alluded to it in one of the videos, especially with the that front archon or front pommel plate. How some people like it to come in close to the gut, some people like it to flare out, some people like a kind of a deeper seat. So I think everyone's different when it comes to saddle fit. And then of course there's the usual differences in any saddle between, for example, male and female anatomy. There are some obvious differences between men and women, and the shape of their pelvises. There are some more subtle ones as well. For me personally, I've saddle fit is a big issue for me. Saddle choice and saddle fit. I've had some major issues and injuries with my hips in the past. So for me, I can't just jump in any saddle and ride it. Saddle fit for me personally is a very kind of particular thing, and I think that's really helped in me designing these saddles. Is that, well, if it's comfortable for me, then it's going to be for a lot of other people.
Yeah, I get you, and hearing all these personal preferences, well. Sounds like it's really good to have someone who can make custom saddles then. So people, if you're watching, you can see the link below this video to check out Ed's wonderful work. We also discussed, there were a few slides that I wasn't able to put into the video. I put them in this presentation. At the very last moment, I switched the presentation method. So I built this half an hour before the show started. So now I'm going to show you an overlay about of the armor over the falls over the cantle. So what can you tell about this? You can't see it right now on your screen, I think, but this is.
I think I know the image you mean, and I guess there my advice to people who are kind of gearing themselves up for jousting is that, start planning for these things early. There are stylistic and time differences in armor. They change over time, and the same is true with saddles. And so I guess start thinking about your saddle early if you're looking at getting into jousting. And while you're going through the process of developing your harness, that's the time to be thinking about your saddle as well, because it really is part of that same system. Getting armor to work properly is like you've mentioned, can be difficult, and it's quite normal to have quite a bit of kind of to and fro with the armourer even after you've received the armour, just tweaking and getting everything working together. And that's the same with the saddle as well. So just start planning for that early.
Yeah, I feel you. I'd just like to check quickly, people. They might notice a bit of change now. No, just want to check quickly if people has asked any questions in the. Here we go. Yeah, a couple of questions. One by Eldon. How well can a saddle fit two different horses? You mentioned you travel with your saddle, but presumably not your horse. So,
There are definitely, I mean, when it comes to horse backs, there are definite kind of types. Obviously, horses' backs bend in basically an infinite variety of ways. The curve along the top of the back can change. The width of the wither, the angle of the bars, all of these things. Sometimes you just get lucky and you find a saddle and it fits this horse as well. Sometimes you get it lucky there, and there are definite kind of types. And so the kind of the like in my video, for example, there was Connie there who the grey horse. She's got quite a short wide back, and so I've met quite a few horses that actually her saddle will go on as well, including Icelandics and Andalusians. So it's sometimes you get lucky.
thank you, Ed. I saw another question, so I'll just switch it. Here we go. Mr. Demon Plays 19 asks, how many pieces are they generally made up of?
How many pieces?
Yes.
You mean how many pieces of timber in the saddle?
I guess.
I guess everyone's saddle is a little bit different, but in general, there's that front plate at the front will be one big piece. Then just not like a normal saddle, there'll be the two bars that run down kind of either side of the horse's spine, and then there'll be a central piece, which is the bit that's kind of missing in a lot of saddles, and then the cantle at the back. So there's kind of 5 main kind of structural pieces in the saddle, pieces of timber.
Okay, thank you. And I saw another question by Eldon again, which is, do you think the future of international jousting, as the art grows, will be traveling with your saddle or hosts providing saddles? That's a good question as well. I'll do it again.
I wonder if I'm the most qualified to answer that, because I'm really quite isolated from, I haven't made it over to Europe to any of the big tournaments yet. But from what I gather so far, some people do travel with their saddles. But the thing is, saddles are awkward things to transport. Baggage handlers are probably the biggest risk to your saddle getting damaged that I've come across.
Yeah.
And when you're already traveling with your personal gear plus a couple of cases of armor, to take a saddle that might or might not fit the horse that you're riding when you get there, I don't think many people bother because of that hassle. I know of some people that have before, but they're not easy things to travel with.
No, and it's always scary, especially going very far when you get the, it's still wood. So if they decide it might be infected with something, you're in big hurt. But I've seen it done. It can be done, but we also need to see how international air travel will evolve in the coming years after all this, in the current crisis. We need to see, but in the end, we should hope to see a future where every event organizer has plenty of saddles for all his horses. That sounds like the dream.
Yeah, I think that's well, certainly in Australia, I think that's the direction that they're trying to head in. It really, I think, there's a reason that these saddles evolved the way they did in the 15th century, and and that is that they work well for the animals, for the horses, and they work well for the riders in keeping both of them safe.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that would be a great thing, both in terms of standards of historical accuracy, but also looking after the riders and the horses.
Yeah, I've experienced firsthand what can happen if you have an improvised modern saddle, just with a cantle just attached on it by a few strings. It doesn't provide that much protection against groin shots at all. No, and
personal experience.
That's personal experience. The bruise is still there, nice round circle at the inside of my leg. I can't recommend it. No, I really can't. I was going to check if there's Eldon thanks us for getting the answers. Seems like hosts with saddles for each horse is the practical future. Fingers crossed for a return to air travel one day. Yes. Liberty asks, hi Liberty, nice seeing you again. How are your saddles coloured?
How are they coloured?
Yeah.
My saddles, most of them now, will have a fiberglass exterior. So this is, I wouldn't say my saddles are exact replicas. And the reason for that is that I'm taking this historical design and adapting it for modern horses and a modern environment. So the actual process of fiberglassing was known in the Middle Ages. They used different materials, obviously, things like chopped ligaments and ligaments. It's not the word I'm looking for. Sinews, chopped sinews, and different sorts of glue to bind the saddle together, that's essentially what fiberglass is. You've got fibers and you've got a glue to bind it all together.
True.
But using modern ones, of course, means that I can get much more predictable results than chopping up some bits of sinew and trying to make my own fish or hide glue or whatever. And then it's paint. And so that's how a lot of my saddles go is as a pretty much a bare tree with pads and girth points on them. One is reasons of economy. It's one reason for that. And then it's paint.
Cool.
Simple as that. Paint. That's the short answer. I gave a longer answer, but the quick answer is paint.
Yeah, I think.
And most of my own ones then have nice leather bindings on them.
Thanks. Let's see if she's happy with that. Yeah, and I think we're also at the final question, and I think it's also a nice time to wrap up. So thank you so much, Ed, for being on the show. It was a delight. It worked again better than last time, and I really enjoyed our conversation. So we'll speak just after I finish up the show. But thanks again just for taking the time, filming and just being with us. You've been a lifesaver, just helping along. Last show, I promised I'll see you again in 2 weeks. Took a bit longer because life. So I'm not going to promise you again, see you again in 2 weeks, but as soon as I can again, I'll post updates on my Instagram and Facebook pages, and you'll see it when it comes. And in the meantime, I'll be in contact with people for the next show. Thanks for watching, and if you like to watch and enjoy this show, please consider supporting the stream on Patreon. It means a lot because this stuff's pretty hard, pretty expensive to run. So thank you again, and hope to see you around next time. Thank you so much.